Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Dr. Angela Novak, and with me is Dr. Katie Lewis. And today we are going to be talking to you about the 4 zones of professional learning and how we use these to foster equity in gifted programs. Today, throughout the presentation, you will hear us advise you to pause the recording in order to take a quick break in order to reflect and think about what we are asking and give yourself some wait time or think time or jot time if you're going through the recordings and journaling and taking notes. And that's just because we don't want to pause the recording for a certain amount of time, 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and just sit here and wait for that amount of time and pause the recording for that amount of time. And so what we'll do is just ask you to pause, and that way, whether you would like to take 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or however long you would like to journal or think or reflect, you'll be able to do that. But that way we're not going to just sit in silence for that amount of time, and we'll give you whatever time you would like to do that. So we're not going to physically pause for that amount of time. We're just going to advise you to pause the recording yourself. And so we'll just say pause, and we'll pause for maybe 2 or 3 seconds and allow you to pause the recording and start back up when you are ready. So by way of introductions, my name again is Angela Novak. I work at East Carolina University. I'm an assistant professor there, and I teach primarily the AIG courses. I am the AIG coordinator, and I also work with the assessment program and teach primarily the assessment courses, both graduate and undergraduate. And these are future educators. In North Carolina, we are a very rural school, so I work a lot with rural education as well. And I also research play, and so I work with the U.S. Play Coalition, and I'm on the advisory council of the Pure Play Everyday organization. I also work with the committee here. I'm the co-chair of the equity committee, the diversity and equity committee here with NAGC, as well as on the board of CEC TAG. And my co-presenter, Dr. Katie Lewis.
I am Katie Lewis. I'm an associate professor at York College in Pennsylvania. I work in the teacher preparation program here with undergraduate students from early elementary through the secondary program. I also work with our non-traditional students, the post-bac students who are going back to school for more teacher certification. I taught in Texas for a while, in Virginia, and I'm excited for you guys to see and hear all about our 4 zones of professional learning, fostering equity in gifted schools. So some of our prior assumptions that we're going to start with to set the stage is we are going to assume that throughout this program that you have some general understanding of the general characteristics of gifted and talented learners. And if you are new to gifted education, we would recommend that you would check it out. Some of the traditional characteristics of what to look for through the NAGC website. We're also recognizing the fact that within many of our school districts across the country that our classroom teachers are our gateway keepers. And because of this, the fact that teachers are the gateway keepers, a lot of times our teachers are first to refer students for screening. And we have classroom teachers making those recommendations for gifted programming, as well as filling out the checklist for our students. So keeping those in the back of your mind as we go forward and we talk about our 4 zones of professional learning as we move forward.
And this is an opportunity for you to pause and reflect and think about what you have in your district as identification recommendations, checklists, what your referral process is for screening. Do you have teachers as gatekeepers in your district? Do you have an automatic screening for all students? So what's your process in terms of teachers as gatekeepers at the identification process? Is it at the very beginning? Do you have a recommendation process at the middle of the round? But at what point do the teachers, if at any point, serve as gatekeepers to the gifted process. So again, pause your video and reflect, and when you are ready, unpause and join back with us. Okay. This has been our 4-zone professional learning plan has been published in the volume that you see here. This is the best practices in professional learning and teacher preparation. And this is the special topics for gifted professional development volume. This is the second in a 3-volume series. And the recommendations for this particular 4-zone professional learning plan are based in, grounded in research. And this research is in research in professional learning as well in culturally responsive learning. So recommendations based on current research is that targeted professional learning is critical for educators and should cover, among other things, the specific characteristics that pertain to culturally, linguistically, and ethnically diverse students. And that should also cover strategies that will support these students. In addition, professional learning should be purposefully and intentionally planned, as well as follow the research-based best practices in terms of how professional learning should be crafted and should include culturally, linguistically, and ethnically diverse best strategies. And by doing this, it has the potential to have a significant impact on not only the recognition of these students, but also the referral to gifted programs and their retention in gifted programs.
So based off of the best practices in professional learning and culturally responsive, we developed the 4 zones of professional learning to increase identification. This started many years ago. Angela and I did some research out of a area in Texas where we were interested to see how teacher perceptions were influencing identification of our gifted students. And we were surprised from some of our findings that our teachers were not identifying the underrepresented groups, even though the teachers represented the same underrepresented groups. So from there, we started asking the question, what can we do through professional learning to help correct and to identify more gifted students? And so we have our 4-zone learning approach. So the first zone is increasing educators' understanding of cultural norms. The second zone is increasing our educators' understanding of the characteristics of gifted CLED students. And these 2 zones are really important because we have to first start with ourselves and understand where we are coming into the classroom. And we're going to dive deeper into zone 1 in a little bit. And then from there, we can start looking at what does it look like to be a gifted student. And then third zone is increasing our classroom support for our educators and gifted CLED students. Because once we get identified, we don't want to stop there. We want to make sure that these kiddos and our teachers have the same support that they need to make sure that these kids are successful in our gifted and talented programs. And then zone 4 is just as important. In this zone here, we're looking to increase and develop partnerships with our CLED parents in the community, because we know that schools function best when we have the support of our families and our community. And these are all zones, which means they can be moved back and forth as needed. And you'll see the 2 boxes to our right here, where when we move through these zones, we're going to have teachers experiencing some change in their perceptions and understanding of what it means to be CLED. And because of those changes, as we move through, we're going to also have the same time a result of a positive change in our gifted population. And these things are all interwoven, which is why you can see the arrows moving back and forth. And sometimes you take a few steps forward, then you take a few steps back, and then we move forward again. So the zones can be dip back and then move forward and then dip back again. So we're going to move through the 4 zones and talk to you a little bit about each one of them.
Right. So as we go through these different zones, again, what we want to do is go through example in practice so that you can see how they will work. And even though we're going to go through, like Katie said, the 4 zones in almost a temporal order, keep in mind that it is a dance, if you will. It is not 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're done. It is always dipping back and dipping forward, so that there is an understanding of, we take a step forward, we take a step back, and we're moving through these in a order of going back and forward, so that we are always going through this in an ongoing way, not necessarily cyclical, but we have the ability to move back and forward. So this is a case of a student named Shiloh who lives with his grandmother, and you can read through it. If you would like to pause the recording here and reflect, take notes, and see what you see, what you notice, what you wonder about Shiloh, and just sort of glance through again what you see, what do you notice, what do you wonder about Shiloh in terms of the somewhat limited information that you have on the screen, because again, this is just a picture, but often when it comes to the identification process, sometimes all we have is a very small picture, and the people who make these decisions don't have the full complex story of our students.
And as you think about it, make sure you're thinking of it, if you're a gifted specialist, right, think of it from the classroom teacher's perspective. Would that classroom teacher refer the child, or would the classroom teacher pass them over?
So don't think about it with an advanced knowledge of education and pedagogy. So again, pause, and when you're ready, come back to us. We're going to assume that you paused, and we're going to keep going. So the first zone is increasing educators' understanding of cultural norms.
So in this zone, we would want our teachers to become more aware of the cultural groups within your school, right? So this is really important, because as a teacher, we all bring our own biases to the classroom and our own perceptions and understanding of what is culture. And so in order to really have change, we need to first take a moment and reflect it ourselves. So if we're thinking about Shiloh, we know that Shiloh is coming from a Native American reservation. And so if we reflect on him, we can see that the first thing we're going to notice is Native American. So on the surface level of the Native American culture, we know that there are many, many tribes. There is over 560 tribes in the United States. And many of our students do attend schools on reservations where culture and academics are both taught for our students. But it's really important to keep in mind that even though that our kiddos are able to attend schools on the reservations, often there are white teachers like myself who are teaching in these schools who may not be aware of the customs and traditions within this culture. So with the Native American group, we need to consider the fact that there are a lot of stereotypes and overgeneralizations. And as we know about all stereotypes, they're not very flattering. For example, we have the idea that Native Americans, there's a high substance abuse, there's high violence within the community. And because of these things, it contributes to lower high school graduation rates, learning deficits that are often mislabeled in the classroom, as well as the impacts of poverty. It is interesting to note that Native Americans are actually the least researched group of gifted students within the field of education. So this is definitely an area that we have a call for research. If we go beyond the surface level, so if we're thinking deeper and wanting to understand more about the culture, we can look at some of the cultural norms. Within the Native culture, it's a very much a matriarchal society, which indicates that the mother, the family is very, very important. The collective, doing good for all, is very, very important. And there's a very, very high level of respect for the elders in the community. Within the Native American culture, oral storytelling is very important. Stories are passed down through community. Children learn very young to listen to their elders, to learn the stories and to share the stories. And the religious aspect is more looking at spirituality through the naturalistic perspective. if we want to understand how Native Americans view giftedness, one of the things we need to consider is how is the term gifted viewed within the community. And in the Native American culture, Gentry and her colleagues found that shaman, the holy man, and the medicine people are the only ones that are considered truly gifted. And this is because those gifts are bestowed upon them by their creator. And so if we think about this, and then we think about from the teacher's perspective, if I think about what I know is gifted, right? So we're looking at those academic gifts. It can almost be offensive if I come into that tribe and start pushing the fact that this child is gifted, when in fact it may be in conflict with what the community is. So my lights flicked off. One of the joys of doing virtual learning. Let me swing those on, get them going again. Angela, you want to take over for a second?
Yes, and Katie brings up a really great point in terms of the teacher coming in and pushing their beliefs. One thing that Katie and I have found in terms of working with teachers is that this zone, increasing educators' understanding of cultural norms, often has a zone 0.5, and that is that that oftentimes the first step is understanding, helping teachers to understand their own culture and recognizing their own culture, because that, especially with a dominant middle class white teaching force, is a really important first step. Because that is a aspect that many teachers can struggle with, is understanding their own whiteness and what that brings to the table, and understanding their own culture, because before they can really understand how other students' culture or the students' culture around them impacts and contributes, they really need to grapple with the fact that they're coming into this student's life and saying, but don't you want to be rescued from this? Don't you want to come and see what we have to, what the whole world has to offer? And they don't understand what they're doing is really insulting to not just the student, but the family. And so that's part of this process as well, is understanding your own culture in addition to other cultures. And so in terms of understanding cultural norms, that's a big piece of all of the zone work as well, is understanding your own culture and understanding the cultural norms of the students in the classroom. But within the community, the shamans, the holy men, the medicine people are the gifted. And so understanding that aspect of that term gifted. So you may go in and say something like high ability or highly intelligent, rather than using the word gifted. We don't have to use certain words if there is a block in terms of that that particular nomenclature. So just being aware of the words that you use, and if that particular word is used to mean something else, we can use a different word. We can deviate from using that particular word because we know it causes conflict within that particular community. And that takes us to zone 2, and that is understanding. So once we understand the particular cultures of the communities within our classroom, then we look at how those students' cultures express and manifest giftedness. And that's where it can be a little bit more challenging, and that's where we see that teachers have particular understandings of what giftedness means and what giftedness doesn't mean. And in this particular case, this is where we see a lot of callbacks to charts like, is this child bright or gifted? And things like this. Are these desirable traits of giftedness or not desirable traits of giftedness? To which my question is normally, well, who decided if it was desirable or not desirable? And so this is where we get to sort of this line of what makes a gifted child gifted. And so there are certain cultural manifestations of giftedness that you may recognize as part of the majority or the white majority culture, the global minority culture, that are not as heavily represented in the global majority culture. So, for example, in the indigenous people culture, in the Native American culture, one characteristic of giftedness that is manifested is curious, but not always question asking. Now that deviates from our typical list of giftedness, because we know that a gifted kid is always asking the questions, right? That's one of our checkoffs on all of our lists, is gifted kids ask the questions, right? And that's the difference between a bright kid and a gifted kid. The bright kid answers the questions, the gifted kid asks the questions, right? So that's the whole mentality that the teachers have gotten into. If they've learned about gifted kids, this is what they know from their checkoff lists, right? But in what we've learned from research, and this particular list is from Tamara Fisher's work. And in this, excuse me, it's curious but not always question asking, the wait and watch and learn rather than question in order to learn. And so this time to take, built on this community culture of observation and learn from elders and process and listen to stories and listen through community building and learn through community building, is really important. And so they're not the ones asking the questions. They're the ones that will listen and wait and watch and learn. And so they don't get that checkoff box. But it's because in this culture, in the indigenous culture, that's not how the giftedness is manifested. It's manifested by curiosity, but the curiosity is through wait and watch and learn, not question and learn. So this child misses that checkoff box as not identified on this list. And so in that way, the checkoff list and this cultural manifestation don't agree. They may be more likely to ask questions after class. So again, they may seem like they need assistance rather than are asking the questions during the class. And one thing that Katie mentioned earlier that led to this sort of idea of a conflict or this push and pull, which is also common in rurality, of wanting to stay within the community and contribute back to the community, to the tribe, is even at a young age, they have aspirations of the community, the contributions they want to make to their community, rather than going off and seeking sort of this higher life, this better life. And so this sort of aspect of motivation of wanting to do and be and better is something that may not be seen in this typical gifted child of, oh, they have these great goals, they have these great and wondrous aspirations to be and do and seek out these great things for themselves. And it may seem to be opposite to that, when what they want to do is come back and learn about agriculture so that they can come back and really be of benefit to their community. And so it may seem opposite to what someone sees as this typical gifted characteristic, to want to stay local, go to a community college, learn about agriculture, and return to the tribe and make significant contributions there. And so because of this, they have this frequent sense of push and pull, and this sometimes this lack of ability of, not ability, but a lack of understanding in terms of the teachers, in terms of being identified, because they don't see these characteristics as typically gifted, and so they don't make the checkoff forms.
So the next zone is zone 3. So after we have our students identified, a lot of times what happens now is these students get into our gifted programs, but we don't adjust our gifted program at all. So we have a very traditional program for students who are not very traditional. And so here, zone 3 is really, really important, because now we're providing that support, those bridge activities for our students who have been identified and who are CLED. So one of the things that we can do for these kiddos is to provide mentoring opportunities so they can see someone who looks like them, who's been successful. So whether it's another student within your gifted program, a faculty member who has similar characteristics, or even if you need to reach outside and draw your students' attentions to successful, high-achieving other people. For example, when I taught in Laredo, a lot of times my students weren't able, who were Hispanic and who were bilingual, weren't able to identify any Hispanic females who were very successful. And so this was one thing that we focused on, and trying to draw their attention to others who have been very successful. There was a Senate, many Senate leaders, there's Supreme Court leaders. So this is really important for our students. And Shiloh's case, right, some mentoring and networking opportunities would be important, but also the use of storytelling, creative art, nature whenever possible, because now we're drawing on the strengths from within the cultural group. So thinking about how can I give these students an opportunity to offer insight and perspective into our gifted classroom and really capitalize on the strengths that these kiddos bring. If you have a student who is also an EL student, right, a language learner, you want to make sure you're providing support both socially and academically. A lot of times our social comes first, right? We need to communicate with our peer groups. We want to make friends, so we focus on that, and our academic lags behind slightly. So how can we take our traditional gifted program and adjust this for more for our EL students? And so one of the things that we should do, and we do this all the time because we are great teachers, we borrow from our colleagues, right? So as a gifted teacher, we should reach out to our ESL learners and our teacher support groups and say, what really works, you know? And let's take some of those great ideas and bring those ESL strategies into our gifted programming. Let's reach out to those who have experience and say, what can we do to support? Now, not only do our students who are gifted CLED students need the extra support in the classroom, but our teachers also need the same support. So how can I provide support and training for my teachers who are now working with this population of students to highlight their abilities, to pull in new strategies, free materials, how can I adapt my materials? So a lot of collaboration needs to occur in zone 3. If you'd like to pause for a minute to think about what in your particular district, resources that you have that you might be able to apply in this zone, we'll give you a second or two to pause. Okay, and we will assume that you have paused.
And I just wanted to add on to that, that the resources in terms of classroom support, a lot of times we think of them as what to offer after students have been identified, but also keep in mind that front loading is a great support. And that is when we provide resources prior to identification, so that we are supporting students and creating opportunities that can promote identification as well. And so that may be something like adding a resource class. So, you know, if you have resource classes, science, library, PE, music, art, that kind of thing, having one of them be a critical thinking. My son's elementary school class calls it nurturing. Not sure why that's the title, but it's nurturing, and that's the class that the gifted teacher, the AIG teacher, North Carolina would call it AIG. Not sure why it stands for academically and intellectually gifted, but that's the word we use here. And that's the class that the AIG teacher teaches to all first grade as a special, as an elective. But it's critical thinking, it's creativity, it's that kind of thing. And so all students get that as a first grade class, as just a, let's have some exposure to creative and critical thinking. And so something like that is just sort of a blanket way to provide some front loading in terms of some creative critical thinking skills that you can provide, either targeted to culturally, linguistically, and ethnically diverse students, or for all students. And then our last zone is increasing and developing partnerships with culturally, linguistically, and ethnically diverse parents and the community. By the way, CLED does have several different abbreviations, like everything in EduSpeak, and you will still sometimes see the E as economically diverse, and it can mean either. And in Shiloh's case, here we would want to learn from the elders in the culture, in the community, and learn from their views on giftedness. We want to create a shared understanding about giftedness and what it means in the school, what it means in the community. If we want to adjust the language we use, we might discuss the terms here and say, okay, well, this is what we mean by giftedness, and we're going to use this terminology instead. And so we have that common understanding. Want to start, if we haven't already started, we want to begin to engage the leaders of the community in school events. We want to make sure that school atmosphere is really aware of and is fostering relationships between the culture of the community and the tribe, and make sure we have that relationship. We can offer workshops, parent workshops, learning opportunities, support there, but really making sure we have that partnership with the parents, with the community, and have that outreach so that there is communication, and make sure that there is a sense of belonging felt by the students, the parents, and the community. And part of that, again, is going to stem all the way back from that initial interaction that Katie described, when the teacher was sort of responding to the student in that fashion of, going and, having that interaction where there was that cultural disconnect. There's a couple of different methods for this. Funds of knowledge is a great community learning approach, and that's just a whole research-based methodological approach that has that's based in interviews with the families, in which you learn about the knowledge that they bring into the community and bring into the class. And so that's an excellent approach in terms of getting to know the families and the knowledge that they bring in, and counting on that knowledge and steeping that knowledge into the classroom and beyond. And so there's a lot of different methods that really can be brought to bear within investing the community and the parents into the classroom, and vice versa. And here again is a great time to pause and reflect and think about how your school really builds on the strengths of your community and your parents, and in what ways you can better engage the strengths of your community and parents. And again, here the key word is the strengths, is not to think about any of the deficits that may come to mind when you think about your parents and community, but really how can you build on the strengths that are found in the community where your students make their homes, and really build on those strengths to develop great partnerships with your parents and community. So pause for a second here and really reflect on how those strengths can develop into great partnerships for the benefit of your students. Right. Hope you had some great reflections on that question.
So if we take a moment and we pull back to Shiloh and we think about the Shiloh scenario that we saw at the beginning, with this scenario, this is just one example of how you can foster conversation with your classroom teachers, with those in your school district, and take students, and create little case studies about those who would be found within your school. Shiloh probably would not make the cut for a referral initially, because even though he had very high standardized test scores, his attendance and his in-class performance are very, very low. And we know that oftentimes in our traditionally gifted programs, there are requirements that students have a good attendance at school, that they maintain a certain GPA. And because of this, he may be overlooked. However, Shiloh does have potential, right? And so he's worth a second shot. He's worth having that classroom teacher recommend for referral. The classroom teachers, oh, my light again. What can I say? The college has programmed it, so I have no control. But with this, we want them to refer. The more students we're referring, the more we're going to have students that are going to be identified. Yes, everybody's not going to be identified in the end. There's definitely more questions you want to ask, more things you want to explore. But we want our referral numbers up, because then we're going to be able to identify more, and then we're going to have more students who are going to make the cut. So if we look at our 4-zone model, and we can apply these zones, right, strategically throughout the school year, doubling back, because we need refreshers, and we know that change comes slow, right, especially if we're changing our mindsets. And Angela and I feel that this is a very effective model for leading professional development in our schools, and that it is effective. We have done some research, and we're always interested in learning more of how this actually works. How does it go, when you're implementing it out in the classrooms?
So if you have any questions or you like more information, again, this is a published chapter in book 2 of the Professional Learning series. You can also reach out to us via email. We're happy to hear from you. We have some upcoming work, hopefully out soon, about this project as well, and some research, again, to be published hopefully in the next year or so, about the efficacy of the 4-zone learning model. So we're excited to get that out as well. And then again, we look forward to talking to you if you have any questions, or would like further information, or would like us to come play and train in your district. We are happy to do so virtually and with masks and all kinds of different options. Equity is definitely a passion of ours, and we look forward to sharing that passion with you. If you would like any further information, just reach out.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoy NAGC Reimagined. Bruce.